Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll get started.
This story will tell about a girl who found herself in a rather interesting place and could not even believe that it really existed. She made her way through the forest, pushed the bushes aside, and then discovered a simply incredible place that she could not even suspect. There were many different mechanisms and machines around. Airplanes and balloons were flying in the sky. The girl looked at all this for a while, surprised, when suddenly a car drove past her, and a lot of exhaust fumes flew out from it. As soon as she saw all this, she was simply stunned, because she did not understand at all what it was, because she had never seen anything like it before in her life. The girl looked around and tried to understand how this was possible, because there were some mechanisms and pipes everywhere from which smoke was pouring out. Of course, having seen all this, she did not understand where she was, and concluded that she did not know this world at all. In fact, the girl had one dream, which she understood that she must fulfill, because otherwise her existence was meaningless. And that dream was a one-on-one duel. That was the name of the movie Yankee, which was popular in her childhood. She simply adored it and always watched and rewatched it. She admired the criminals of the previous generation who were present in this film, but most of all she liked one character there, who for her was the best. And that is why, even as a child, she would very much like to find the leader of her gang someday, because for her, it was the most valuable thing in life. Of course, this dream was eventually changed to having the leader of her gang wear a special combat uniform that she made, since she knew she would never be able to communicate with them in any way. And in order to fulfill her dream as an adult, she enrolled in the fashion design department in high school, which helped her improve her skills and develop her own designs. One day, when she had learned the basics, she finally bought the fabric she needed. Of course, she suspected that she had overdone it a bit with the amount, but she was still happy. It was the development of the Special Combat Uniform version 5, and this time she was excited, so she definitely hoped that she would complete it. However, when she turned the corner to return home, she could not even suspect what would happen to her. It was the last day of her life, and all because it happened very unexpectedly. Some guy jumped out at her with a sharpened object and immediately pointed it at her. The girl looked at his wild eyes and couldn't do anything. However, soon after that, she was run over by a car, and she couldn't even understand how it happened. She died instantly and very cruelly. However, immediately after that, she opened her eyes and thought that most likely she returned home and just fell asleep, and this was all a nightmare. The girl really believed that she had dreamed it all. Just a bad dream. She had almost been killed by some passerby, and then suddenly her vision had become blurred. She decided that most likely her brain had been unable to come up with a further development of events, so it had made her wake up. But the girl didn't have time to think about all this, when suddenly a man appeared right before her eyes, all in a dark uniform, and swung a huge sword at her. This guy addressed the girl with a changed voice thanks to his mask, and began to say something in a language completely unknown to her. Of course, she was incredibly scared, so she immediately jumped away from the place where this sword had already flown, and somewhere there, her head should have been. The girl screamed loudly in fear. Then she saw that this man was not alone, and did not understand who these people in black robes were and what they wanted from her. Then suddenly she noticed a strong pain in her hand, and when she looked, she saw that someone had scratched it. Then suddenly the girl realized that this was most likely not a dream, because the pain was real. She sat surrounded by some men and didn't know what was going on. Also looking around, she noticed that she was in some kind of Western-style mansion. Of course, it was a place she had never seen before in her life, so she became very curious about what was going on around her. With a trembling voice, she turned to these strangers and asked where this place was, and also who they were. The man spoke to her again in a changed, rough voice. However, she did not understand a word, because it was an unfamiliar language to her. Then she looked at him with a pitiful look and asked if he could repeat what he had said. The man said something in an unknown language again, and then reached his hand towards her head. She knew she couldn't understand anything he was saying, but she decided not to show it. At that moment, when she already saw that he was approaching her, she closed her eyes, because she was afraid that something terrible would happen. However, this man simply hooked some kind of jewelry onto her ear. She was immediately very surprised and saw a lot of gears there. The girl had never seen anything like it before, and she also tried to tear it off her ear, but she couldn't. It was stuck there tightly. However, at that moment, the masked man spoke to her again, and now she finally began to understand him. This guy said that they called her when her life was coming to an end, and he also explained that he was a savior of souls. Of course, the girl was very surprised when she began to understand him. However, he suddenly grabbed her by the shirt and said that if she wanted to be saved, she had to give up her life. Mina looked at him with a surprised look, and the man continued. He said that in exchange they could offer a soul from their world. When the girl did not answer, he suddenly loosened his grip, and she was able to apply a little effort and escaped from his hands. Without thinking twice, she immediately started running away because she knew she was in danger. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew that if she stayed there, her life could end. The girl ran along corridors unknown to her and thought only about the fact that these people wanted to kill her. When she went down the stairs, she suddenly saw a small door nearby. She immediately became happy, thinking that this could be the exit. She decided that if she could get out of this place, then perhaps she could escape somewhere else and sort things out in a calm environment. Mina ran up to the door quite quickly and, opening it, saw that there was some kind of forest around. This didn't stop her at all. She immediately started running through the forest. She didn't know where she was running, but she didn't want to stand still because she knew that sooner or later they would catch up with her. And then after a while, she suddenly looked back and saw that behind her was a whole army of these people in black. They were all armed and shouting that she would not be able to escape and that they would catch up with her anyway. The girl then sped up even more because she didn't want to die in an unknown place without any explanation. When she disappeared behind the trees, she decided to stop for a moment. Seeing that they were no longer pursuing her, she breathed a sigh of relief. Mina was very happy about this. She thought that most likely the strange masks on the heads of these people limited their vision. That was why she was able to hide among the trees. And at that moment, she found herself in a world that was completely unknown to her, in which there were many strange structures, and the buildings were completely different from those in her life. She couldn't even figure out where this place could be. She knew it wasn't Europe at all, although it looked a bit like it. There were also fast cars, and the architecture was a bit similar, but the girl was absolutely sure that this was not Europe. It was a completely different place. The people around her, seeing her, began to whisper and discuss something among themselves. They looked at her with an angry look and even with some disgust. Mina, seeing all this, became wary. She did not understand what was happening and why. When she saw that she was being watched, she thought that she probably stood out too much. That's why the other residents looked at her so askance. But the girl didn't have time to take another step because someone grabbed her hand. She didn't even understand how it happened and didn't resist. A rough voice turned to Mina and said that he had caught her and also called her their victim. Turning back, the girl again saw these strange masked men. Then one of them, grabbing a sword, raised it up and said that she must die for their god. The girl was very scared, but she couldn't get out anymore. This man held her very tightly. Then she just closed her eyes, screamed loudly, and started asking for help. But when nothing happened, she opened her eyes and suddenly heard strange sounds. They said that someone had saved her. Those people in black who held her and wanted to kill her were now lying dead on the ground. She wiped away her tears and suddenly saw some unfamiliar man standing with his back to her. He turned to the void and said that attacking such a lady was not something any gentleman would do, so he simply had to intervene in this matter. Mina tried to take a closer look at this stranger. She noticed his light hair. Then the guy slowly started turning towards her to introduce himself and get acquainted. The sun that blinded the girl did not allow her to examine him at first. However, as soon as she saw his beautiful face, she could not utter another word. It was a blonde guy, dressed incredibly stylishly. He had an emerald necklace around his neck that matched his glasses perfectly, giving him the look of a master. His face was so beautiful that she even felt a little scared. She also noticed that this man preferred retro-style clothes. She also noticed that his hands seemed not real, but mechanical. Looking at his head, she noticed strange glasses that reminded her of something. The girl felt that she didn't look very dignified just sitting and looking at him, so she decided to distract herself and look away a little. As Mina turned away from the stranger, she closed her eyes, slightly embarrassed, and thanked him with all her heart for saving her life. The stranger was silent for a while. He also studied the girl carefully, and then asked her strange questions, which she did not know how to answer, since they seemed meaningless. Mina immediately asked what he meant by such questions. She added that she was most concerned about where she was, as this place seemed completely unfamiliar to her. However, when she saw that the man was not reacting to her words, she immediately asked if he even understood her speech. The boy still didn't answer. Then Mina looked at him even more closely and noticed his light hair and handsome features. She also noticed his eyes, which emanated incredible willpower and rage, which he seemed to be able to control at will. It suddenly occurred to her that this man reminded her of the hero of her favorite film, One-on-One Showdown, Kuramanchik. All this time the man looked at her attentively, without taking his eyes off her, but without saying a word. After some time of silence, he suddenly asked what she was saying, as Mina had said something too quickly and he had not understood anything. The girl immediately beamed with joy and asked if he was a cosplayer. Without waiting for an answer, she said that his outfit and appearance were just perfect, and suggested that it could have been prepared for new filming. Mina couldn't contain her joy and continued to shower the man with admiring words. She said that she couldn't believe that he looked so much like Bunta. The man just stood there and stared at her, not understanding what she was talking about. Her accent was unfamiliar to him, and she spoke too quickly. Finally, when she fell silent, the man was able to say something. He suggested that she was probably mistaken, and that it was all just a figment of her imagination. The girl was surprised to hear that she was mistaken. She immediately asked if this was not cosplay or a photo shoot for fans. The guy continued to look at her in surprise, because he didn't even know what the word cosplay was, and when he was about to ask about it, the girl suddenly screamed, and all because she saw that man in black behind him again. She told him to turn around and look at what was happening behind him, but she didn't have time. Before Mina could blink, the boy was able to easily block the black man's blow. He simply put his hand under the sword, and it broke in two. At this point, the guy said that she was sitting right on the road, so it was better for her to get lost, and also called her a stupid woman. As soon as Mina heard all this, she immediately felt offended, because no one had ever called her a stupid woman. She was especially surprised after he scolded the dead knights, saying that they did not behave like gentlemen, and now he himself showed himself in a definitely not the best light. Mina was about to do something, but she didn't have time because another guy came up to her from behind. He took her hand and told her to go this way. The girl didn't have time to understand anything, but when she turned her head to the side, she saw a red-haired guy, also in vintage clothes, with a chic top hat on his head. He bowed slightly to the girl and said that if she stood too close to Lord Leon, she would be drawn into the fight, and it was better for her not to do that because she was completely unprepared for the confrontation. At that moment, Mina began to carefully examine this man. He had beautiful red hair and incredibly beautiful emerald green eyes. In fact, she liked him right away because she could look into those eyes forever. And besides, she really liked his style of clothing. She also became curious about what kind of contact lenses he had. After all, they looked very professional, and she even thought that she should definitely find out the brand from him, because she would like to have the same ones for herself. It would be easier for her to do cosplays with them. Mina also realized that this man's clothes were completely abnormal for her, because she would definitely not wear such clothes on a daily basis. And all these guys looked exactly the same as the rest of the people on the streets. They were all dressed strangely. But now the girl understood perfectly well why everyone looked at her so askance, because she was wearing a simple white dress, which had gotten dirty and torn on the way. And in this unknown city, everyone was dressed up as if they were going to a carnival. Even these figures in black robes with their strange outfits and masks looked quite interesting, and she really wondered if this was really a cosplay shoot for some video, and she had simply butted in where she shouldn't have. When she saw these guys in masks with guns, she felt a little scared and uneasy again. She didn't understand what was going on at all, but what irritated her most was the fact that no one could explain properly where she was and what she should do. The red-haired guy noticed her expression and smiled, saying that it was okay. Lord Leon never lost, so she didn't have to worry. It would all be over soon. Mina, hearing this name again, immediately asked who he was because she had never heard of him. The stranger at that moment pointed towards the fair-haired guy who was dealing with the knights at that time and said that this was the same man who was fighting for her life at that very moment. The girl, watching his confrontation, thought that it was simply excellent. Even if the opponent had a sword and this opponent was not alone, the guy could still easily deal with them. This man fought as if he was all-powerful. Even though he was completely alone and fought with his bare hands, he still managed. These warriors were not going to retreat either. And then suddenly Mina noticed that blood was pouring out of this guy's hand. She was very scared and thought that all this was real. She also remembered the fact that she was slightly injured and felt pain, and concluded that most likely all this was not a dream, but reality. Some time passed from that moment, and now all the opponents were finally either dead or immobilized, and Lord Leon suddenly turned to the girl. He asked her who she thought he was, and also asked her not to tell him that she did not know the name that the common people had given him. The boy continued to address his enemies, and said that they should never underestimate the Marquis of the delinquent. So he asked them to come closer to him, and he would show them who was right. The people who were around, when they heard these screams, immediately began to look at him, and could not believe that this was really the offender, the Marquis. Mina noticed that he spoke in a rather quiet but rough voice, with his chin down and his superstar gaze looking into space. He simply had the perfect menacing look. This guy had a scary look and incredible fighting spirit, and on top of all that, his appearance reminded her of Kuramochi Bunta, the exact image of the blonde Yankee she was a fan of. And at that moment, when the girl watched how he fought and how he spoke, she decided that it was definitely him. She also thought that this man was definitely worthy of wearing her special combat uniform. He was the real gang leader she dreamed of. At that moment, the girl's eyes literally sparkled with happiness, because she had been looking for similar people for a long time, and now fate itself brought her together in this place. At this point, Leon suddenly turned to these dark men and asked why they did not come to him, and asked, "Has something really happened to them?" He even began to tease them and asked, "Are all their formidable swords really just for show? But are they really cowards?" This phrase was the last straw for these guys, and they went on the attack again at that moment. From that moment, not even half an hour had passed, as all the opponents were dead and lying on the cold ground. Leon, when he finished, turned to his assistant, Noah, who was tying the pipes with rope, and asked if he knew who these guys in black robes were. The man replied, in a very calm voice, that they called themselves the Callers of the Lord. He had heard that they performed suspicious rituals on a daily basis that violated the law. Leon then sighed heavily and told him to hand over these suspicious individuals to the royal guard. After that, the guy turned his head to the side and again paid attention to the girl and asked, "What is this strange outfit she has?" He also looked more closely at the thing on her ear and assumed that it was a translator. Leon finally looked calmer and asked the girl, "Isn't she from their nation? And that's why she needs a translator to understand everything?" He didn't have time to let her say a single word and told her to go with him because he still had a few questions for her. Mina couldn't take it anymore. She yelled at him and told him to stop for a second because she didn't even have time to say a word. The boy wasn't used to being interrupted or yelled at. However, she ignored his surprised expression and asked if he could tell her that she was ready to fight. As soon as Leon heard this, he was even more surprised. At first, he did not understand why she was saying this, but he thought that she was simply crazy. The girl, meanwhile, explained that if he said he was ready to fight with the same menacing look as before, she would keep it in her memory forever. So she really hoped that he would let her record this moment on video. Then Mina started looking for her phone, but she couldn't even find it in her pocket. She was very worried and couldn't figure out where it had gone. She also really hoped that someone would return her smartphone to her because her dream had finally come true, and she couldn't even capture it. Leon looked at her in surprise. He was really convinced that she was crazy and asked what she was talking about, and also asked if she had any psychological illnesses by any chance. However, the girl was beside herself with the emotions she felt inside. She said that she was absolutely serious and asked him to say the line again, in the same voice and with the same looks. Mina, looking him straight in the eyes, said that she would keep it in her memory, at least because it was so important to her. But Leon was tired of hearing all this nonsense, so he grabbed her hand and, turning to Noah, said that he would leave the cleaning to him. And he told the girl that she should just follow him and not say anything else. The girl was very surprised when she heard this. She already tried to say something, but changed her mind because she did not want to anger this stranger again. His partner, at this point calmly bowing, said that Lord Leon could leave this matter exactly to him and put it down, and also assured him that everything would be fine. After some time, the guy brought her to some kind of transport. Mina looked at it for a while and noticed that it looked very much like a motorcycle. Although she had never seen such a design before, she even liked it. Before he put the girl on his transport, he gave her earplugs and told her that she had to put them on first. The girl did not object. However, she suddenly asked why he had put it in her ear. The guy had already sat on the motorcycle and said that, thanks to this item, they would be able to talk even while walking. Because of the strong wind, it is usually impossible to do this. Therefore, a special thing existed for this. When he saw that she was just standing there, he frowned and told the girl to hurry up, because they already had to leave. Mina felt very uncomfortable and constrained. However, she realized that it looked like she had no choice, So she had to get on this strange and suspicious motorcycle with a strange man. But as soon as she sat on him, the man began to ride at such a speed that she barely had time to grab onto his body so as not to simply fly back. Mina didn't expect him to go so fast. She even thought that she would just fall and break, since she might not have time to grab onto him. When she pressed herself against his back, she noticed that it was quite strong and pumped up. And when the girl was so close to him, she even began to get a little nervous, because this had never happened to her before. Of course, she had boyfriends before that she dated. However, the only intimate gesture that happened between them was simply holding hands. Absolutely none of the guys she chose were willing or able to become the leader of her gang, and she never had the opportunity to use her special combat uniform. After they had been riding for a while, Mina finally heard Leon's voice in her ear. He asked her if this was her first time riding a steam bike. The girl had never even heard of such a name, so she only said in a trembling voice that it was indeed so. However, after thinking about it, she also added that, if you think about it, she had never even ridden a regular motorcycle before, and this one was somehow faster and more dangerous. Leon continued listening at this point and said that he had heard that other countries still only used horse-drawn carriages for transportation. However, their kingdom's technology was superior to all other countries, so they were quite advanced in this regard. So he explained to the girl that he himself had built the steam engine, which they were now riding on, and he had done it quite quickly but efficiently. As soon as Mina heard this, she was a little surprised. In fact, she even became curious. Did he really like motorcycles so much that he decided to choose this type of transport? She could also notice that his voice became more intense and energetic when he spoke about it. The girl thought that this man saved her, so she wanted to believe that he was not bad at all. However, she understood how dangerous this world was, and she could not believe it just like that. Mina knew that if something happened, it could be very dangerous and unpleasant. She found herself in a kingdom whose name she had never heard of, and saw many unfamiliar landscapes around her. And besides, now she was riding with some unknown guy who, for some reason, decided to save her on a vehicle that looked a lot like a motorcycle, but was a little different. Absolutely everything he had just told the girl was completely unknown to her, so she felt, of course, very detached and uncomfortable. After a short silence, Leon decided to ask again what she had said before he went into battle, since he had not understood a word of what she had said. Then the girl said with an admiring voice that he just looked like the main character of an old movie she had watched. Mina also added that it was a movie about Yankee. The man's signature phrase was "ready to fight," and she thought it was incredibly cool. As soon as the guy heard all these unfamiliar words for him, such as film and Yankee, he became even more confused and still didn't figure out anything for himself. Mina, when she saw his surprised expression, immediately realized that he did not understand her at all, and for some unknown reason did not know the words that she knew. And besides, at that moment they were passing by a bright landscape that was opening up before her, and a strong wind had risen outside, which she felt right through her whole body. She felt a little cold because she was practically naked in just a small dress. But on top of all this, her hand was cut, and she realized that, most likely due to the slight bleeding that had occurred, she was also not feeling very well. Mina constantly felt some kind of fear, and she also had a vague feeling that all this was reality and not a dream. She did not know how this was even possible, but she could assume such a turn of events. While they were driving, the girl thought that this was most likely some other world, and she also did not know what Leon was planning to do with her and where he was taking her. But she hoped that she would find answers to these questions very soon. She closed her eyes and thought that if this was all a dream, then she would like to wake up as soon as possible, because she didn't like it at all. Some time passed from that moment, and then suddenly they turned a corner and began to drive past a small town in which there were very nice houses. When Mina noticed them, she was very happy and said that this city was very nice and welcoming. All the people who were on the street began to greet them and even wave. The guy continued to look ahead and explained that this was Lidora, a rural area. However, it was still a pretty friendly and nice town where people helped each other. After this city, they entered a rather deserted area where there were not even any leaves on the trees, and there was a lot of dust and dirt on the ground which flew straight into the travelers' eyes. As dusk began to appear around them, Mina wondered how long they would have to travel and what kind of area they would end up in. And so after some time, they finally reached a huge, gloomy castle, around which several more houses were visible in which people lived. Mina looked around and was very surprised. This city was rather unfriendly, dark, and even sad. However, From the houses, you could see the chimneys from which smoke was coming out, and she became interested in what they were making there. Then they rode past the city and stopped near a huge castle, which looked pretty good. In fact, she hadn't seen such structures for a long time. This castle impressed her, but at the same time, it was quite creepy, because there was not a single soul around. When they arrived, the man took her hand again and led her inside. He explained that this was the castle of Astra Marquisata. Of course, the girl had never heard of such a person, so she asked in surprise who he was. Leon looked at her and said that this was the lord of the border region, the one who protected the border itself, and he was Leon Astor, the head of the Astor Marquisate. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately felt awkward, because she realized that he was a big shot and a nobleman at that. As they walked forward, the girl suddenly noticed that there were two people standing near the entrance to the second floor. However, because they were far away, she was unable to see their faces. When they came closer, I saw that they were twins, and they really were. The two boys looked exactly the same. They bowed and turned to the Lord, saying that they were very glad that he had returned. Mina, passing by them, could not even look away, because she had seen twins in her life, but never so similar. But when their eyes met, the boys immediately looked away. The girl was a little surprised, because she didn't think that they would be scared, because she was looking at them. At this point, Leon took off his outerwear, glasses, and some other armor, and handed them to the twins to take back to their place. After that, he brought Mina into the room, and as soon as she entered, she was amazed. It was so beautiful there. She had never seen such luxury before and could not believe that this room could be so extravagant. She walked around the room and looked at all these details. The girl also lingered for a long time near the chandelier, because it was really just beautiful. Leon, meanwhile, stayed behind her and watched the girl's reaction, because he didn't think that she would be so delighted when she saw the room. Then the boy turned to her in a quiet voice and said that he had brought her to this place thinking that she might be a spy. However, given her behavior, he was no longer as sure of this judgment as before. So Leon asked who she was and where she came from in their kingdom. The girl turned to him and said that she was Matsuo Mina, and she was a high school girl from Japan. Once he heard all this, he understood almost nothing again. The guy asked what a high school girl was, and also explained that he had never heard of her country, Japan. Leon decided to stir up the situation a little himself and asked what the purpose of her stay with them was. Hearing this, the girl was a little surprised, but said that she had no purpose. She simply lost consciousness in Japan, and when she came to, she was surrounded by strange people who wanted to kill her. He wondered if it was true that these were the same summoners he had been fighting all this time. Leon asked her not to tell him that these guys had actually managed to do something like that. Something unrealistic, like a summoning. Mina, hanging her head down, became sad again and said that she absolutely did not understand anything he was talking about or what he meant. But the guy still insisted on his version. He said that she was probably not very good at deception, but she could still be a spy, just not a very skilled one. The girl was starting to get annoyed. She screamed and said that she was not like that at all and asked what he meant when he said spy. But at that moment, he didn't say anything. Leon just stood next to her and looked into her eyes for a while. After that, he came up to her quite quickly, and they were very close to each other. This made Mina very uncomfortable. She tried to move away from him so that there would be more distance between them, but she tripped over the side of the bed and almost fell. The man managed to catch her in time, grabbing her by the hand, but after that he very carefully laid her down on the bed and continued to look the girl straight in the eyes. The girl immediately screamed very loudly and asked what he was doing. She was very scared and did not know what to do. However, Leon calmly asked her if she knew why this kingdom was developing with steam technology and remained the leading country that had never been invaded by any of the others. Of course, the girl couldn't know all this because she didn't even know where she was. So, in a panic, she simply asked him to move away from her to a safe distance and not to touch her. However, the man ignored her request. He looked at her angrily and said that it was all because his clan was protecting the borders. Leon explained that they do a lot of work to protect their country from various invasions, not only from people, but also from monsters, who can also be very cruel. Then the guy suddenly noticed a scratch on her hand, from which blood was still flowing a little. He moved closer and sniffed it. The guy just looked at the scratch for a while, and then licked it with his tongue. Mina was incredibly surprised. She just lay there and panicked, not understanding what he was doing at all. She was even a little embarrassed, because she didn't think that such a handsome guy would lick her wounds. However, When he finished, he said that her blood was very sweet and had a familiar taste to him. At that moment, the man's eyes turned bright red and he said that he loved the sweet smell of blood. He also asked the girl to let him enjoy it even more and let him taste her life. As soon as Mina heard this, she was simply amazed. Her body began to shake very much from fear, and she asked what he meant when he said that he wanted to taste her life. The man then explained that they were a clan with special blood that existed only in their country and nowhere else. He began to move even closer to the girl. His eyes began to scare her very much because they really changed their color, and she had never seen anything like that before. He also explained that they possess very physical abilities and fighting power that far exceeds that of humans. Their instinct makes them desire the blood of the opposite sex, and they are attracted only by its smell. The man even had fangs in his jaw, and the girl had never seen anything like that before. Leon also said that they usually only want a little blood from a lover or partner. However, when he licked the girl's wound and tasted it, he was very surprised. In a quiet, thoughtful voice, the man said that he felt she was special because he didn't want to stop. Mina didn't understand what he meant, but the man kept his eyes on her wound and said that from the moment they met, he had been almost fascinated by the unique scent of her blood. He also said that it was probably the same with his assistant Noah, because he was also one of them. He also had a special ability. The guy suddenly smiled and said that in this castle, in fact, absolutely everyone was a vampire. And as soon as Mina heard this, she could not believe that she had voluntarily come to the castle of vampires. Of course, she had heard and read a lot about vampires in her life, but she had never believed in them because she understood that it simply didn't make any sense. But now, as the girl sat and looked at this man who was simply obsessed with her wound and wanted to drink her blood so much, she realized that all this was reality. The man's eyes were getting redder and redder. He said that she was indeed right. She had fallen into a vampire lair. Then the man took and ran his fingers through her hair, and Mina asked in a frightened voice, "Is he really going to drink her blood and thereby simply kill her?" The man continued to look at her with incredible lust and said that he did not want to kill her, so she should not be scared at all. The moment she looked at him again, she noticed that his face had become even more beautiful. His skin was simply glowing. There was not a single flaw on it, and those eyes perfectly emphasized his individuality. Even though she was incredibly scared, she simply couldn't take her eyes off his appearance because it enchanted her so much that the girl even forgot about common sense. Leon explained that blood was a delicacy and they did not drink lethal amounts from a person in order to kill them. However, he also explained that the act of drinking blood occurs simultaneously with physical intimacy. The girl, hearing about this, was immediately very surprised. For some time, due to shock, she could not understand what he meant, but then she guessed and was amazed. She blushed all over because of the shame she felt at that moment. The man at this point moved closer to her ear and said that her blood attracted male vampires, and he would like to know where she actually came from and what her real purpose for being in this place was. He leaned on her with his whole body and, running his hand over her cheek, said that he wanted to ask her about it in this bed. Mina was literally burning with shame. She screamed again and began to refuse him. She asked him to stop all this because she was against such contact. Then Leon pulled away from her again and said that he wanted her to say that he was the only one who was okay with that voice and that expression. He wanted her to be on his side. The guy with a very sad expression on his face said that he didn't need anything else. He just wanted her to confirm her loyalty to him, and then everything would be fine. When Mina looked at his eyes, she didn't understand why he was looking at her with such a look, as if he had fallen in love with her. Then the man approached her again. She no longer resisted, but simply lay there and remained silent. The man opened his mouth and sank his huge fangs right into the skin of her neck. In fact, she lay completely calmly. Everything he did not hurt her at all, but on the contrary, she even felt partly pleased by it. The man continued to drink her blood when suddenly someone knocked on the door and addressed Lord Leon. For some time, the girl just lay there and analyzed the situation that had happened, but then she realized that this could not continue. Mina was incredibly embarrassed. She quickly threw the man away from her, afraid that someone would catch them in such a strange position. The man, who did not expect such a turn of events, could not even cooperate, so he fell to the floor. He looked at her and asked what she was doing, and called her a super strong woman. Mina immediately started yelling at him and said that it was the power of desperation. She also asked him not to take away her phrases like, "What are you doing?" The girl was incredibly angry. She continued screaming and asked how he could attack her like that. She also said that he was the worst person on earth. Leon wasn't going to just sit there and listen to all these accusations against him, so he yelled at her and said that he hadn't done anything. And besides, she didn't resist. But the girl knew perfectly well what he was going to do and called him a real pervert. The man was very surprised when she called him that and asked, does she really dare to get into a verbal fight with him? But Mina wasn't afraid of him at all, so she decided to even engage in a physical fight. She grabbed him by the shirt and told him to shut up, because she had been ready for this fight for a long time. At this moment, the person who was behind the door could no longer wait for an answer and permission to enter. So this little girl turned to Lord Leon and said that she would enter. Then the doors to the room opened, and a small, incredibly beautiful and neat girl walked in. She was wearing a small dress with a gear instead of a belt. She had beautiful brown hair and green eyes. Mina, who was about to hit the man, immediately froze when she heard someone enter the room. She looked at the stranger in surprise, but then immediately began to be touched, because this girl was really very sweet and beautiful. She couldn't take her eyes off her and thought she was too cute, like an angel in the flesh. This little girl was very surprised when she saw Lord Leon in such a position. She immediately asked what he was doing with this woman, and she also asked how he could behave like that with their guest. Leon frowned at this point and, turning to Krista, asked her to look closely because this super strong woman was about to hit him, and he was not doing her any harm. At that moment, Christy approached the guest and, pushing her away from the man, sighed heavily, turned to him, and asked how he could say such things about such a beautiful and sweet woman. The girl held her hand, after which she got down on one knee and kissed Mina right on her neat little fingers. As soon as she saw all this, she immediately became embarrassed. After that, Christy, smiling, winked at her and decided to explain who she was. The girl stood up and bowed, saying that her name was Christy and that she was a maid. She also asked for forgiveness for her master's rudeness. Without thinking twice, the girl took Mina by the hand and asked her to go with her. The girl, smiling happily, led her to the exit and said that she wanted to show her the room in which Mina was now to live. Mina didn't resist because she really wanted to get away from Leon, because she didn't know what other bad things he could do to her. She followed Christy silently and did not say a single word, because she did not know who this girl was and what she was capable of. After some time, the maid herself turned to the lady and said that she could simply call her Chris and asked if she could find out the lady's name directly. Mina immediately said her name and added at the end, calling her Miss Chris, thinking that it would be much more polite, and that was how she should address her. But the maid immediately giggled and said that she didn't have to say Miss at all, just calling her by her first name was quite enough. After that, Mina asked with a sad voice and downcast eyes, "Do I really have to stay in this place?" But Chris, smiling, said that she shouldn't worry at all. After all, they would treat her with the utmost hospitality and would definitely take into account all her wishes and requests. This did not console Manhwa at all. She silently followed the girl and did not understand at all what kind of world this was, and did not know whether this castle could be safe for her. However, remembering all those words of Leon and how he bravely fought against those terrible men who wanted to do something terrible to her, she thought about it. The girl realized that she wanted Leon to wear that special uniform for the fight that she had made herself, because she had dreamed of it her whole life, and decided that if not now, she would never be able to do it again. But then she thought about the fact that he had practically attacked her, and she realized that it might be very unsafe to stay around this man. The girl's mind was in complete conflict between thoughts, because she couldn't imagine anyone else but Leon as the leader of the gang who could wear her special combat uniform. She decided that she simply had to fulfill her dream, so she decided to stay in this place and not leave Leon. After all, she had finally found the leader of her gang, so it was a huge honor and privilege for her to have such an opportunity, and she simply could not foolishly refuse it. After some time, Christy finally brought her to a room and told her to use it. It was a guest room, but as soon as Mina entered it, she could not believe that they had such luxury for guests. She had never seen such a scale before. She literally gasped with admiration and said that this room looked as if it was made for a princess. After that, the girl walked up to the bed and immediately sat on it, thinking that it was probably very soft, and her assumption was indeed correct. As soon as Christy looked at the girl more closely, she suddenly noticed that she was bleeding from her neck. She immediately asked if everything was okay because the wound could be deep and very dangerous. Mina immediately moved to her wound and said that she was fine. It didn't matter at all now. However, the maid, without thinking twice, crawled up to her and began to approach her earlier with her mouth. Mina was very surprised, but she became even more uncomfortable when the girl began to lick this blood. After Christy did this, she smiled happily and said that she was very sweet. At that moment, her eyes also turned red, just like Leon's. Mina, of course, was very scared by the action that the girl had done. She pushed Chris away from her and could not believe that the girl was also like Leon. But the moment she looked at her again, she saw that her eyes had become normal again. She didn't understand what had happened, and even thought that it was her imagination that had made Chris's eyes red. But then suddenly she thought about the fact that since vampires live in this castle, she assumed that Chris was also one. However, according to Leon, a girl like Chris should only desire male blood. However, for some reason, she began to lick the blood of her own gender. But then suddenly, the maid began to lay the girl on the bed and said that she was probably very tired, and therefore asked her to take a little break and have a good rest, gaining strength. Mina didn't object because she really was incredibly tired. The girl assumed that it was most likely because the tension had finally eased, and she felt like she could be safe for a little while. Before closing her eyes, the girl saw Chris for a while. However, when she began to fall asleep, she saw the maid with red eyes again. When Mina fell asleep, she had a rather strange dream in which events from the past and present were intertwined. This dream began with her walking through the streets of her city in Japan, and suddenly she heard a male voice addressing her. The girl immediately turned around because the man was addressing her. He looked like some kind of superhero. However, the man, addressing the girl, asked if she knew Kuramochi Bunto. As soon as Mina saw this man, she was very surprised, because he was Masha. In fact, he was the main villain from the movie she loved, A One-on-One Duel. This man also happened to be the leader of the opposing team that was in opposition to the main character, Kuramochi Bunta. Mina didn't understand at all why she was there, because that day she was walking to and from school as usual. However, suddenly she encountered many unfamiliar but at the same time familiar people. Then one of the men who stood next to the villain asked if it was true that she knew him well, because she was his woman. As soon as Mina heard this, she immediately became happy. She grabbed the guy's hand and asked if she really was Bunta's woman. The boys, as soon as they heard her, couldn't understand why she was so happy. After all, they were villains, and were hoping for a completely different reaction from the girl. Mina then let go of his hand, knowing that she was probably making them even angrier. She also assumed that this was the worst time to be happy, since she was standing in front of villains who could kill her at any second. She also thought that since she was Bunta's woman, she had to protect his name even when the man was not around. The girl turned away from these men and said that she did not know him at all, and did not understand what they were talking about. But the villains immediately became angry and told her not to deceive them by saying that she did not know him, because she had just rejoiced as soon as she heard that she was his woman. His partner said that this judgment is simply impossible, also because they have done a thorough investigation and know for sure that she is indeed Bunta's girlfriend. Mina didn't have time to do anything, when suddenly the main villain grabbed her by the hand and told her to go with him. The girl tried to break free and asked him to let her go, but it was useless. However, the villain continued to hold her and told her to go with him quietly, and they would not have to talk about anything like that anymore. But the guy didn't have time to do anything else, because as soon as he turned his head to the side, a fist flew straight into his face, and this blow was so strong that he even bit his tongue until it bled. The man who hit him immediately screamed and said that they had attacked a woman, and it was very low and cruel of them to do so, especially considering that there were 3 of them and she was only one. As soon as Mina turned her head to the side, she immediately saw a man who looked very similar to Bunta. However, she was not so happy because he also looked like Leon. Especially her theory that it was Leon was confirmed when the guy said that real men don't do that. After the guy dealt with all the hooligans, he took her by the hand and led her somewhere to the estate. She walked behind and did not know what to do. Then he sat her down on the bed and began to wipe her open wound with antiseptic so that no infection could get in. The man frowned and said that this idiot Yonga always resorted to such dirty tricks, and because of this, the boy hated him more than anything in the world. But Mina seemed quite calm. She said that she was fine and also added that he should not worry about her because she could take care of herself. But when she looked at him, she immediately wondered if she had received this injury a little earlier than she had entered into confrontation with these villains, because she did not look fresh. But at that moment, to her great surprise, the man suddenly began to lick her wound, and she moved completely onto the bed, and the guy's appearance changed. He now had different clothes, just like Leon. He started to come closer to her and said that they were vampires and loved her blood very much. After that, Mina immediately woke up because she could not stand this dream any longer. The girl opened her eyes, gasping for breath. She didn't immediately realize that it was just a dream, so it took her some time for her consciousness to calm down. But as soon as she sat up in bed, Chris's voice was immediately heard, smiling, wishing good morning to the lady, and saying that she was very glad that she had finally woken up. Mina glanced at the girl and immediately thought about why she had a dream about Bunt, but at the same time, this man was Leon. But she also thought that it wasn't surprising after everything that had happened. Crazy dreams were natural after the events that had happened to her that day. However, at that moment, she suddenly felt something strange on her hand and immediately pulled up her shirt, looking at the wound she had. However, there was a bandage now. Chris explained that she seemed very agitated, so she decided to take charge and bandaged her wound. She also treated it before covering it with a special bandage. Mina was a little surprised at first, but thanked her. Chris, meanwhile, said that she had fallen asleep last night, so the girl asked if the lady would like to take a bath before going down for breakfast. After some thought, Mina finally agreed and decided that she definitely could use a bath. So the maid prepared a hot bath for her, and the girl went straight there. She was left alone with her thoughts. The girl took the foam in her hands and thought that it all looked very good, and she was very glad that she was able to take a hot bath after a hard day and night. After that, Mina looked at her bandaged wound and was very surprised that when it got wet, it began to burn badly. Therefore, the girl decided not to dip this hand in water. After Mina finished taking a bath, she got out of it and didn't even have time to wrap herself in a towel when suddenly the curtain opened. Chris entered her personal space, not at all embarrassed or ashamed of the fact that she saw Mina completely naked. The girl herself felt very uncomfortable about this. She quickly began to cover her body with her hands and did not understand what her maid was doing, because it was shameful for her, even though Chris was a woman. However, the maid didn't even think twice. She quickly wrapped the girl in a towel and told her to hurry up and change her clothes, because breakfast was already on the way. The girl also put a towel on her head so that her wet hair would not cool her body even more. And so some time passed from that moment, and Mina finally changed into the clothes that Chris had prepared for her and also tidied up her hair. As soon as she looked at her outfit, she immediately thought that it was a straight-up cosplay outfit, because she usually dressed like that when she wanted to be some character. Chris, meanwhile, brushing her hair for the last time, said that it was incredibly black and simply amazing. She really liked it. She said it was incredibly thick and smooth and just silky. Chris was really jealous of her hair because she wanted to have something like that. As soon as Mina heard this, she was very surprised because she had never been complimented about her hair before. But she thanked her and said that she had wanted to have long hair for a long time, so she had been growing it for several years. After that, she touched her hair herself because she had never noticed that it had become glossy and silky, but she thought that perhaps this was all Chris's good care. Then suddenly the maid, who had left the room for a while, returned, and in her hands she had some kind of small blue box. The girl turned to her and said that Lord Leon asked her to give it to her, and at that moment she handed over this very box. Mina began to examine it in surprise because she was curious about what was there, and when she opened it, she saw a large, beautiful decoration. Chris explained that it was a treasure that had been passed down in their family for generations. It was a tradition to give it to those who married in the castle. Chris also said that they talked about her protecting people from various disasters because the Astor family is a clan of vampires, and accordingly, they have special advantages and powers. Mina looked in surprise at this decoration, which was now lying in her hands, and told the maid that this was rather strange because she was not getting married at all and to no one. The maid smiled and said that this was of course true. However, perhaps she was simply given this jewel because she was human, and the Lord wanted to please her. The girl, meanwhile, began to examine it and noticed that it was really just amazing. She fell in love with it from the very first time and would really like to wear it on herself. But Chris also asked her to be very careful with this gemstone because it was vulnerable to sunlight. The girl said that the legend said that he could evaporate and disappear if he was exposed to sunlight for too long, so she had to simply avoid those direct rays. Mina, hearing this, was a little surprised, but said that she understood everything, but then asked why she would give such a jewel if she had just met Lord Leon, and they were hardly even familiar with each other properly. The maid replied that it was all because her face and voice reminded him very much of one person, although she noticed very well that Mina was still different from that person. When she began to speak, they had a different manner. As soon as the girl heard about some unknown person, she immediately asked who this person was, because she was really interested in who she resembled. But the maid did not answer. She merely nodded her head and smiled politely. Of course, she had no intention of revealing such precious secrets. Mina herself fell silent because she knew she couldn't ask more in such a tense atmosphere. So she just waited while the maid fastened the pendant on her. And so, when everything was finished, Mina wanted to look at herself in the mirror and see how it looked on her. However, she couldn't do it. The girl turned to the maid in surprise and asked, "Do they really not have any mirrors at all?" After all, she would like to see how this medallion would look on her. Chris was a little surprised, but said that Lord Leon didn't really like mirrors, so of course there weren't any in his castle at all. As soon as Mina heard this, she was very surprised, because it was the first time she had heard that someone didn't like mirrors. But Chris explained that it was true, and one day he suddenly said that he didn't want to see his reflection there. Of course, no one liked this and it was inconvenient, but he broke absolutely any mirror he saw, so the servants decided to just give in to him, because cleaning and buying new ones would have cost them more. As soon as Mina heard this story, she was very surprised. After all, this man had stunning beauty, but at the same time, he hated mirrors because he did not want to see his reflection there. She was also interested to know if there was any story behind these events that made everything happen this way. However, at that moment, Mina suddenly noticed Christie's beautiful hair and decided to compliment her. She said that her hair was also very fluffy and beautiful, and that her face was incredibly cute. She looked like an angel. As soon as Chris heard this, she became a little sad. She said that she never called herself an angel because she was just a bad liar. The girl said all this in a very serious voice, and also added that before she realized it, there was no one left around her. And that is why, from that moment on, she is always alone. As soon as Mina heard her call herself a liar, she immediately asked how that was possible. However, the maid only confirmed her information and became sad again. The girl even noticed tears in her eyes. She felt incredibly sorry for the girl. However, she decided to console her a little and said that she did not think that Chris was a really bad person. As soon as she heard this, Chris was very surprised and immediately asked what she meant. Mina immediately explained that a truly bad person has no guilt. He is rotten to the core and therefore does not feel any such feelings. As soon as Chris heard this, she was very surprised. She still did not understand what the girl meant at all. After all, she was always used to criticizing and humiliating herself because of all the situations that happened in her life. Mina explained that it was a speech by the villain Yongi from the movie she loved most in the world, One-on-One Duel, and she had just quoted his words. The maid still didn't understand anything because she had never heard of any films and didn't even know what the mistress was talking about. But the girl smiled and told Chris that maybe she was lying, but that wasn't what she wanted to do. Maybe she had to do it, but she probably still felt guilty. The maid was a little embarrassed. She had never heard such truthful and pleasant words spoken to her. She lowered her head and said that, of course, it was all true, but she still couldn't accept it. Mina interrupted her and said that she was worried that she was lying. However, that didn't make her a bad person because she was worried about it. So Mina explained that she meant that she wasn't a terrible liar and shouldn't beat herself up for thinking that way because it wasn't true. The girl also smiled and said that she still thinks Chris is an angel, and that is much more important to her. In order to finally convince the girl, she told Chris to never talk about such sad things again. For example, that she was lonely, and therefore suggested being best friends so that everyone would be happy. As soon as the maid heard that she wanted to be her best friend, she didn't immediately understand what she meant, and the girl explained that it meant being close friends. The maid immediately beamed with joy, and tears appeared in her eyes again. However, these were happy tears. She thanked Miss Mina for all this, and said that she was incredibly pleased about it. As soon as the girl saw her expression, she couldn't help herself. She looked even cuter, really like a real angel who had just come down from heaven. Some time passed from that moment, and Chris brought the girl to the room where everyone usually had breakfast, including Lord Leon. As soon as Mina entered, she was very surprised because the dining table was already completely covered with various dishes that smelled incredibly aromatic and delicious. Some of the dishes she couldn't even recognize because they were so luxurious and could even be called a delicacy. At that moment, Mina really realized that she was incredibly hungry, and when she thought about it, she realized that she hadn't eaten anything since yesterday. After all, so many adventures had fallen on her head that she didn't even have time to think about it. In fact, Mina was so engrossed in looking at all the food that she didn't even notice that she wasn't alone in the room. At the other end of the table sat Lord Leon, and next to him stood Noah. The man, smiling maliciously, said that she was a very vulgar woman because she allowed her stomach to rumble so loudly. But he also said that he had already convinced her of the need to eat, so he asked her to take her seat quickly and not linger. As soon as Mina heard this, she immediately thought that he meant that he gave her this jewel by accident. She calmly took her seat and thought how incredibly glad she was that she had taken the lectures on table manners in high school. They were really useful now. Mina knew very well how to handle cutlery and which fork was responsible for what, so she immediately took the right utensils and tried a piece of meat. Then her stomach was ready to sing a serenade, because it was magnificent.